Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to this morning's study. And before we begin, can you join me in a word of prayer? Dear Father in heaven, we are grateful for all that you do. And we give our hearts to you, and we ask that you can use us to your glory. And we pray that as we open your word together, that your Holy Spirit can speak to us, teach us, instruct us, and encourage us in the time that we are living. We know that there's many things we yet have to understand from your word, but we ask that we can walk in this advancing light and that we can more clearly discern your will for us individually and for this movement, and that we can participate in this work in the last days. Be with us now through thy Spirit, we pray and ask in Jesus' name. Amen. Well, good morning again, everyone. So yesterday we were beginning to look at Raphia and Penium. And one of the things that we have difficulty fully grasping, I guess, is how we're going to place I'm trying to open up this file here, how we're going to place these waymarks within these lines. So for instance, when we dealt with verses 3 to 9, we were able to draw this out. So this diagram that you see here, this diagram is taking these verses and laying them out on a line. But we know that we have December 25th, 2023 as part of this line, even though that's a future date, not very far away. We don't know what it means, but it's dealing with the four winds of heaven, right? So when we take the four winds of heaven and we go from the start of the Soviet-Afghan War on December 24th, 79, if we take the words, the Hebrew numbers, 4, which is Arba, 702, and winds Ruach, 7307, and heaven, Shemaim, or four winds of heaven, so it'd probably be singular. But anyway, 8064, and you add them together, you get 16,073, and that is the number of days from December 24th, 79 to December 25th, 2023. And it's kind of a remarkable coincidence that something like that would happen. Now, we could say, well, what's December 25th, 2023? Well, we already have from September 11th, 2001, the word years. And so that word years, which is Hashanah or Hashanah, is 8141, and that's the number of days inclusive from September 11th, 2001 to December 25th, 2023. So we have two witnesses for that date. Plus, it is also a symbolic date. It shows up many, many times in our lines, both in history, the history dealing with Clovis, with Charlemagne, with others. It's also my baptism. So like this year, 2023, that will be, because I was baptized in 82, so that would be 41 years since my baptism. But also it is specifically December 25th, 2021. That waymark, the end of our line, becomes really important. And we also have, if I'm remembering, there is, which one number was it? There was one number, if you count from November 9th, it always goes to December 25th. Can't remember which one that is. So we have this December 25th show up, right? So it shows up all the time, and it's here on our lines. And we are now passing over the ground of fulfilled prophecy. We're dealing with this election of Biden and Trump. And we know that the election is going to come up in November of 2024. And then we're going to have either Biden as president again, which is very unlikely, or another Democratic president or a Republican president. But we're saying that based upon these, that there's going to be a civil war president, and that was based upon not so much these verses, but going back here to this history with the Persian kings. So I still need to put more charts here in this, but we had the next president going to be a civil war president. I just don't have that chart here. Okay, so trying to get this thing to work properly. I don't know what this is doing. There we go. No. Don't know what, I'm having problems with this. Oh, sorry, I'm just having trouble with this Zoom. Okay, can't. Hang on. Okay, I had to do something there with this Zoom. It was not working properly, so I shut down that one. Can't see the screen now. Sorry about that. It'll just take a second to restart it again. Okay, there we go. Now I can look at things properly. Okay, so we had yesterday then addressed the fact that Raphia and Panium are future events. And we had dealt with chapter 10, and I'm pretty satisfied that the general idea of chapter 10 works. That is, it's referring to what's going to happen in response to wokeism. But it is still a type of what's going to happen. Ultimately, this battle between the king of the north and the king of the south, between these powers, which we'd call spiritualism, and apostate Protestantism. And we know that they make a league, at 9/11. But really they're at battle with each other. And so this battle between these powers, between these powers in the world, we have another power, and that power's Rome, right? So Rome is going to come into play in verse 14. And so how do we take this? How do we take that we have Greece representing our lines? And so far it's representing our lines up until this immediate history that we have. But then we have this Raphia and Pania, which I say we haven't come to yet. That this Raphia and Pania are on Jeff's line that he had 9/11, midnight cry, Sunday law, midnight and midnight cry being Raphia and Pania. And then the Sunday law, the actual Sunday law, not a type of the Sunday law, but the Sunday law that we have always talked of. Now we are in that Sunday law since 9/11, and that it is a progressive Sunday. It has been progressing since what happened, the events of 9/11. And we could see the part that Islam had to play. And we know that Islam is then still going to have a part to play, that it came into our history. Obviously, the Afghan Soviet war is part of that history. There's anybody who lived through the 70s knows that we had a number of different enemies that were being focused upon. One is, of course, the Soviet Union, China with Mao Zedong, and then we had near the end of the 70s these encounters progressively with Islam, and then through the 80s this continued to progress, and then through the 90s, and then ultimately when we get to 2001, I think the world wakes up and Americans wake up to what they now consider the real threat. The Soviet Union has gone, and this becomes the new enemy. So obviously in Hollywood, the evil people, instead of being Russians, are generally going to be some form of characterization or caricature of Islamic terrorists of some sort, right? So the world's focus of what the enemy is continues to change. But we know behind this all, I mean, ultimately is Satan, but we have the papacy, and the papacy working behind the scenes, involved in these wars in ways that we could speculate on, but involved in end time events in a way that is long. They're playing what I guess they call the long con or something like that. They're thinking about these things long term. They have long-term goals, and so we have this battle of Raphia and this battle of Panium. So what is it? That is, we know that back in 2019, we're saying, in 2018, even earlier, we're saying this is Russia and the US. So what is this battle of Raphia and Panium about? What is it we have come to see that it's more involved in? What's involved in it? Anybody?
It's a spiritual war.
Okay, it's a spiritual war, right? So we know back the Battle of Raphia originally was just a battle between the Ptolemaic Empire, the king of the south, and the Seleucid Empire, the king of the north. It definitely wasn't a spiritual battle back then. Now, so what do you mean by a spiritual battle? I mean, it's not the battle between Christ and Satan. It's not between two powers of the world. It's a type of civil war within the world. So what particularly is this war? Okay, anybody?
Isn't it a battle more for the minds of people rather than for territory?
Okay, so it's for the minds of people. Now the question is, why is this happening? Why is the world, Greece, involved in this battle of ideologies? What is Satan's goal? So if we think back to Avril Manhattan's book, the Vatican in World Politics, back in the 50s, he's going to recognize that there's this conflict going on between the Soviet Union and the United States. the Cold War, but that there is a player there that is often not considered, and that player is the Vatican. Now, the Vatican wants to be placed back upon the throne of the earth to bring about Christ's kingdom in some ways, right? That's the goal of the papacy. They're not happy to just be a church, that some people belong to. Their goal is it's a universalistic goal, right? They're that Catholic church, this universal church. So what is the papacy doing? What does these battles between first the Soviet Union and the United States, and then ultimately between the UN and apostate Protestantism, which is what we're saying that these represent, this globalist agenda, an atheistic globalist agenda, where the Catholic Church has a theistic globalist agenda. So what's the goal? And how do these battles have a part to play in it? We've talked about this. So back in the 90s, Seventh-day Adventists are saying there's going to be a Sunday law. The moral majority is going to come in, be elected, elect a president, and we're going to then have a Sunday law in the United States, which is going to lead to a Sunday law in the world. Now, what's always been the problem with that idea? I mean, we know it's true, but what's the problem in that happening? Okay, so the problem would be what? I mean, why didn't it happen? I guess is one question. But why didn't it happen, and why can't it happen the way that we often envision it? We have competing philosophies, right? The world is becoming more and more secular. I don't just want to be the one talking about this. I want to see that you guys are understanding it.
As you've been talking, I'm reviewing something from on this battle.
Okay.
So I'm having to ask why, what kind of symbols we would see from this, but the battle itself has a portion where the King of the North is drawn into basically kind of a trap, and it allows the rest of the forces to rout the main battle groups of the King of the North.
Okay, so in the actual Battle of Raphia,
right,
which is what you're reviewing here, We have the king of the north. It has, well, just before that, it has raised up an army, right? That's in verse 10, right? It's stirred up. And it believes that it's in a very strong position.
Right.
Okay.
But the question is, why does it believe it's in a very strong position?
Okay, so in the actual Battle of Raphia, well, they're outnumbering them basically. I mean, they have greater forces. I mean, that would be the simple thing, right?
Okay.
So I'm just trying to look at the numbers here. So Antiochus's army was composed of 5,000 lightly armed Carmanians and Cilicians under the Biticus of the Macedonian, 10,000 Phalangites. I don't know what all these things mean. 20,000 Macedonian Phalangites of different groups. So what is the total of this army?
Well,
Ptolemy's army, well, they had 70,000 infantry. So that they look like they're pretty well. It looks like they have superior forces, actually.
correct. The Ptolemaic forces had a gross number of 75,000. So you had 70,000 infantry, 5,000 cavalry.
Okay.
And Antiochus had 62,000 infantry, but 6,000 of the cavalry.
Yeah.
Now,
More elephants.
quite a few more elephants, right?
Well, yeah.
But they are different they're different types of elephants.
Yeah.
Now,
African and Indian
and Asian.
and Asian. Okay.
So the biggest portion of this as to why Antiochus believed that he was superior had a lot to do with Theodotus the Ayatollah, who had been an officer and commander for Ptolemy, and then gave over his territory to Antiochus.
Hollow Syria and Phoenicia.
Right.
Okay.
So symbolically, how do we break this portion down in relation to the verses that we're studying? We have the literal from history, but how can we place this symbolically?
Okay. So you're talking about like the numbers themselves?
I'm not talking just the numbers. I'm also talking, we have those that betrayed Ptolemy.
Okay.
We have a battle that takes place, and at this time, the Ptolemaic forces lost approximately 2,200 of their 75,000 in force.
Yeah.
But the Seleucid force lost close to 20% because it lost 14,300.
Yeah.
And a majority of that came out of their infantry.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they didn't lose as many horses, but or as many elephants.
Right.
But they also had lots of infantry that were captured as well.
And of the
1,000.
of the Syrian wars that we're talking about here, this is the third of 5.
Okay. So it's not the fourth Syrian war?
it may have been part of the fourth, but I'm looking at 5 specific Syrian wars, because you would have Kos, Andros,
Yeah, but
Raphia, Panium.
it says here it's part of the Fourth Syrian War.
Okay.
Right.
I'm just looking at individual battles.
Of individual battles. Okay, well, so you're saying this is the third battle of the Fourth Syrian War?
It's the third battle of part of the Fourth Syrian War. I'm looking at the different battles right now.
Okay. Like the Battle of Kos, the Battle of Andros, Raphia, Panium, and Onoparis.
Yeah, because the Battle of Kos and Andros were both naval battles.
Okay.
Raphia and Panium are both land battles.
Now, Panium's part of the Fifth Syrian War.
Correct.
Okay. And Andros is part of the Third Syrian War. Kos is part of doesn't say, but okay. Okay, so so the main characteristic here that you wanted to point out, though, is that there is this move from this sort of betrayal of Theodosius the Aetolian, who had betrayed Ptolemy and handed much of Syria and Phoenicia over to Antiochus, right?
Right.
So is it that the king of the north feels that it has, maybe this is something to do with the United States moving from wokeism to, but that's just a movement within the US itself to a more conservative stance? So there just is a false idea about winning this battle, but this battle is more worldwide.
That's one way of looking at it.
That's possible. And that you can see, like in verse 10, this is more in the United States itself. Right. So you have this fight between, Republicans and Democrats within the US. But now this battle goes on to a larger stage. So as the United States moves more towards, we'll call it the right, in a response to wokeism, there becomes a much more global battle over these forces. And that would be the Battle of Raphia. And so we can see initially, because we talk about a Sunday law in the United States. So when we talk about a Sunday law, we use this term Sunday law. Well, we know there's first a Sunday law in the US. And then over time, that Sunday law moves throughout the world. So obviously, just looking at the US isn't enough for their Sunday law to exist. All of these other countries need to embrace the Sunday law as well. And so there has to be a reason for them to do that. And that's still always been a problem for me, how that happens. It's not clearly laid out. We know that there are economic and other kinds of situations that call for this Sunday law and on a universal sense. So then you have a universal Sunday law, and this is prior to the close of probation. And then after the close of probation, we're going to have Satan's personation of Christ, and we're going to have a Sunday law that has a death decree attached to it. Right? So when we get into the really bad stuff in that period of time, where God's people, we have the time of Jacob's trouble, the 7 last plagues, all of those things, the 6th plague being the time of Jacob's trouble. So then you have, that Sunday law. But even prior to that death decree Sunday law, people are seeking to kill Sabbath keepers, right? So we know that this Sunday law progresses. And we've seen a type of it in our history dealing with the pandemic, how easy it is for fear to cause people to turn against one another, and also for human rights to be suspended. But we're going to see this on a much larger scale, in the sense of not just that it's worldwide, but also, in its comprehensiveness in restricting human rights.
As a question based on the term, are we seeing that human rights are being suspended, or are we seeing that individual rights are being suspended?
Right. Yeah. So individual rights are being suspended in the name of, human rights, I guess.
Right.
So these human rights definitely are different than individual rights, though we often use the term interchangeably. But we have group rights. So there's these contrasts between these two powers, and we have this Constitution. So this Constitution, it's not like the king of the South is bad and the king of the North is good. Yet we can much more sympathize with the king of the North than we can with the king of the South, as a Seventh-day Adventist, right? Because it's got the American Constitution there. But the American Constitution becomes a casualty in this whole scenario.
Would you say that it becomes a casualty, or it becomes the basis over which the battle is fought?
Well, it's kind of the basis, right? But it's not going to be preserved in its basic principles if we have a Sunday law, right? A Sunday law would be against the Constitution. Yet it's seen that in order to preserve the Constitution, we have to wage this war against all of the things that are opposed to the Constitution. But in so doing, we end up repudiating the Constitution, right? All of the principles of Republican and Protestantism are set aside. So if we're going to start, putting the red text here in this battle of Raphia, so when we have the king of the South, we have Ptolemy the Fourth, and we're not going to place that as a person, right? This is not in the context of the 7 presidents of the United States. At least I don't see it that way. I see this as something that the 7 presidents of the United States is something that precedes the 8th. And the 8th, we know, is the beast that was and is not. Right? That's the papacy. And we can say, well, we need to have all these presidents before the papacy comes. But, and we can see this here because we're going to have Rome come in verse 14. But still, behind all of this, behind of what's happening in this battle between the North and the South, between atheistic communism and apostate Protestantism, that this is a pawn game in a bigger battle, right? it just sets the stage for what's going to happen. Because we know Raphia and Panium are not the Sunday law. Right? In our lines, we don't have, Panium is the Sunday law. This is the midnight cry. So if we're going to look at this and because I've weighed over through my mind, should we take this and just line it up with our history? Because we do have symbols from Daniel chapter 11 that we could use to line up with our history, July 18th and March 27. Say, well, just repeating this history. But I think it's showing the bigger line, midnight cry, the bigger line. So it shows that what we've experienced is not those waymarks from 9/11, midnight cry, Sunday law. We haven't experienced midnight yet. Now we're in the history of the Sunday law, since 9/11. But as far as what we call the Sunday law proper, and midnight cry proper and midnight proper, we haven't reached midnight. So when we say the king of the south, we have Ptolemy IV here as the king of the south. He's moved with anger and shall come forth and fight with, he's going to continue this Horsehearing war, with the king of the north, with Antiochus III. And Antiochus III shall set forth a great multitude, a large army. So the battle lines are being drawn here, right? They're setting up for battle, but the multitude of Antiochus's army shall be given into his, Ptolemy's, hand. And Ptolemy IV would defeat Antiochus III in the Battle of Raphia, 217 BC. And then when he, Ptolemy IV, hath taken away the multitude of the Syrian army, his heart shall be lifted up, and he shall cast down many 10,000s. So we know that this, and also Ptolemy shall not be strengthened by it, not complete the conquest of Syria, right? So he's going to cast down many 10,000s. Jeff has applied that in a way that he understood it back in 2017 when he was talking about the Battle of Raphia and what was going to happen. And so we need to evaluate that as well. What does that mean, many 10,000s? And then we know the king of the north shall return, shall set forth a multitude greater than the former, and shall certainly come after certain years. So they regroup, 2012 to 2004 BC, or not 2012, 212 to 204 BC, with a great army and with much riches. So Antiochus III would defeat Ptolemy V Epiphanes at the Battle of Panium, right? So probably 200 BC, driving Egypt out of Judea, Palestine, once and for all. Okay, so.
But let's recall.
Yeah.
This Ptolemy that was defeated.
Yeah.
About how old was he at that time?
Well, I thought he was fairly young, if I'm remembering the right person.
I think you are.
Yeah.
I believe at that point that Ptolemy was about 5 years old.
Yeah, he was just a little kid.
So we're talking about those that held the throne for him making these decisions.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm just trying to figure out. Now he was pretty young. Let me see. Yeah, he came to the throne at the age of 5. They have a coin with his image on it. Looks pretty young there. but yeah, so he started, he reigned from 204 to 180. So, I mean, he reigned for a while, but at the time they have the Battle of Panium, he would have then been about 9 or so, right? 8 or 9, if I remember correctly. So he's not really involved in this.
Not really in charge.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, so um okay, so now how does that relate to this? So you bring that up. I'm just trying to.
Well, at this point, with everything that we are seeing going on right now within the United States,
Mhm.
is Biden truly the one that's in charge?
Well, definitely Biden's not in charge. I mean,
Right,
I mean, there's just no way. He has no idea what's going on. He can barely even read the script put in front of him.
right.
So he's not in charge. I don't know who is in charge, but
So at this point, with what we're dealing with, would we say that we have seen our battle of Raphia and that we are about to come to our battle of Panium at this time?
well, we can see a parallel, but I still think this Battle of Raphia is future,
Okay.
right? So I know what you're saying, because there's the echoes of it, but this Battle of Raphia is because what we see in this Battle of Raphia and Panium, when you look at the earlier lines, when you look at the battles between the North and the South, I mean, this is in the United States. This is Republican and Democrat. This is Trump and Biden. Those are the players. It's not universal. Now the UN, you know, is still there, right? Because it represents the globalists. So the globalists sort of take over of the United States, in a ideological sense that's occurring. But this has to happen on a larger scale, right? So I'm saying that it makes more sense to take this Battle of Raphia as something that's still future, as midnight, especially when we consider all of the things that are supposed to happen between midnight and the midnight cry that are supposed to happen in our history, which aren't occurring. So, in order to have midnight, you have to have a message that's given to Seventh day Adventists, not just a few people here and there who are Seventh day Adventists, but somehow that the church receives this message. They hear it and have to respond to it. So to me, it's how can you say what has happened with this movement and our perspective on what's happening in the United States is the fulfillment of these prophecies in their repeat in history. They echo it, but or pre-echo it, but they aren't the thing. They're types. But we do have this Battle of Raphia. And so if we're going to say the King of the South, so the King of the South here can't be just the UN itself. It has to be atheistic philosophy. There's a battle going on between these two different powers, two different ideologies, right? So we have to say here, this is atheistic communism, right? More than just wokeism. But there has to be some kind of control being placed upon the world. Now, as much as I don't think the World Economic Forum is anything more than a bunch of juvenile thinkers, people who are immature, they're influencing these governments. And we have all these world leaders, all this elite who think that they actually know what's going on and that we can use technology to finally bring about the ideals of Marxism, right? That we can have a command economy. Because if we have enough input, if we have a digital currency, if we have enough information fed, maybe through AI in some way, collecting this information and data, and also feeding back through propaganda to the populace to control their wants and desires, that we can manipulate them to act in a way that we can then predict and control what's happening in the economy, right? That is the idea that is being put forward by the World Economic Forum, correct?
I would agree.
So they can control the population in numbers. They can control the food supply. They can create want, and so that it changes people's behavior, right? They can change people's behavior, and this kind of idea, this of changing people's behavior in this way, has been around for a long time. An example, which is kind of a sort of a simple one, is if you have homeless people and you don't want them sleeping on park benches, well, you make park benches that people don't want to sleep on, right? It's a simple idea. You make it so that people don't want to be in a location by just how you deal with the architecture. Or even in Edmonton, they played classical music at a downtown park so that, the drug users wouldn't hang around there, because nobody wants to listen to classical music when you're doing drugs. So, so you can control people's behavior in this way. And they believe that, with all of the social media, all of this feedback, that they can control the population so that you will, by 2030, you won't own anything and you'll be happy about it, right? Now, I think their ability to bring about their plans are unrealistic. But what they can do is they can destroy the economy in attempting to bring about their goals, right? So I don't think they're going to be successful in bringing about their goals. And somebody could say, well, their goal is actually to destroy society. And so maybe if that's the case, if that really is their goal, then they're going to be able to do that. It's easy to do destruction. Destruction isn't a difficult thing to do. But getting things to work, that's much more difficult. So can we say that this battle here is this battle with atheistic communism seeking to bring about this ideal society? But the reason it loses ultimately, now initially it's going to win. Initially there's going to be some progress, right? It's going to get a lot of support until the reality of how childish, these ideas are. And then the response would be, the Battle of Panium, right? I don't know what people think of that. So this philosophy has to gain the support of the governments of the world. So if I put that there, does that make sense? The governments of the world are going to, now it says, shall be moved with choler, that is, raise a large army, they put there. But it's going to get the governments of the world Now, this also would, of course, be not just governments, but the people of the world. So they're going to come forth and fight with him. They're going to continue this fourth Syrian war. So this battle that has raged in the United States is going to become more intense on the world stage. So we can see that the United States wins this battle internally so that it retains this idea it's the king of the North. It's opposed to globalism. So if we're going to say what Antiochus III is, this is the two-horned power. We'll just put it that way, republicanism and Protestantism, right? Those two horns now are going to be battling against, so if you're going to talk about this fourth Syrian war, it's basically an atheistic revolution. We'll put it that way. So, I mean, we can change these terms, but I just want to get the general idea there. So I put there the two-horn power, just Republican. So this is, again, the USA, right? So the USA shall set forth a great multitude, a large army. Now, what is the USA's army? What is I mean, this is not talking about military power. So again, this has to be some kind of social media propaganda, we'll just put propaganda. Okay. Now, this doesn't look like a hot war then, in this case. This looks like a type of Cold War. But there could definitely be elements of it that in the United States, we have a civil war going on. And I'm not saying that that's going to stop. It'll probably still continue. So Antiochus' army, this is, we're just going to put here the people. Okay, so any thoughts that people have? So Ptolemy's hand. So if we're going to look at Ptolemy's hand, what's the hand?
Would we say civil power?
Okay, so when we look at the hand in Daniel chapter 11, we have to think about verse 41, right? He shall also enter into the glorious land, and many countries shall be overthrown. That one should be, many shall be overthrown. But these shall escape out of his hand, even Edom, Moab, and the chief of the children of Ammon. Now this, of course, the he here is the king of the north, right? In this case, it's the papacy in Daniel 11, verse 41, right? The United States is connected to the papacy because of the fact that it's providing the military and economic forces in our time. So this is our history here. But if we're going to talk about his hand, so this is the hand of the king of the north, when we look at the hand, what is the hand representing? So here we have Ptolemy's hand. Daniel 11, verse 41, we have the papacy's hand. So you said, Dwight?
I was asking if the hand was civil power.
Okay, well, it's got to be more than civil power.
Would it be military power?
Okay, well. Okay, so, but it has to do with the persecutory power, right? The ability to do harm, right? So maybe civil power, military power, kind of touching on it. But if we think about escaping from the papacy's hand, it's from control. That, you know, it's going to slip, right? It's going to get out of its control. It's going to escape. So here, the people are going to be given into the hand of Ptolemy. So what does it mean? So Ptolemy's hand. We can put here control, right? If we're going to deal with Ptolemy. Okay, so in this case, who's controlling and how are they controlling them? That they're under the control or the spell or whatever of this atheistic communism, right? That is, the populace must submit to this, we'll just call it neo-communism. Populist, that's not, well, I'll just say the population submits to neo-communism. So what we're going to see then, based on our interpretation here, whether it's correct or not, is that and we would say this is the world's population, and this would be the United States population. So one of the things we see is this backlash. So if the Republicans win in some sort of civil war, I mean, they're always going to go too far, right? And we see a whole population that has been brainwashed over time. That's not going to be happy with the restrictions that are going to be placed upon them. The tide is going to flip the other way, but it's going to happen on a global scale. Let's say and this is just a suggestion. So Ptolemy IV would defeat Antiochus III at the Battle of Raphia in 2000 or 217 BC, 217 BC. So we'd have to say, what is going to happen? You know, just say something like the World Economic Forum gets its chance to control the world by 2030. I mean, does something like that happen? Is it likely to happen? And we could take all of this and say, well, this just happened in our history, right? This has already happened. This was all about the pandemic. And we can see the parallels here, right? We could say, well, you know, this kind of has happened. But this would be something that's even, if this is future, something that's more, because, you know, I read the book by Klaus Schwab on COVID-19 and the Great Reset, right? And, you know, would the Great Reset be set in place? You know, so if I did this, now I'm not saying that this is exactly what's going to happen, but let's say something like that is set in place on a global scale. That we're going to try communism on a global scale. I mean, there's definitely lots of people pushing for it, whether they're smart enough to actually get what they want. Now we could say, well, the Great Reset has been set in place. You know, the pandemic is kind of that thing, but there's more to the Great Reset than just getting people vaccinated, right? You know, maybe somebody a little better looking than Klaus Schwab comes into power in the UN, and you know, who knows? Maybe they don't have to be smart. So, you know, maybe Justin Trudeau could be that world leader that pushes things in this way. I don't know. It's definitely not liked by people in Alberta here, but it seems to be losing ground in Canada. But you never know. Or maybe somebody else, some person replaces Klaus Schwab and is a little more intelligent and a little more insightful and managed to get these ideas promoted. You know, I mean, this is just an idea. I'm not saying that this is what's going to happen. But we have to have something happen like this in order for the world to go in the direction of a worldwide Sunday law, a universal Sunday law. We have to see the failure of some plan that's represented by the King of the South. See, because they win, right? The great reset's set in place. But when he, you know, whatever we want to call this, Ptolemy the Fourth, we're just going to say, again, atheistic communism. When he has, it's terrible spelling, has taken over, has taken away the multitude. Now it says here Syrian army, right? So this is, Syrian army is what that they take away. So I don't know what we would label this as. Maybe it would just say apostate Protestantism. Right, so that's Syria, that's the kingdom of the north in the United States, which represent the false prophet, right? Apostate Protestant northern Israel. His heart shall be lifted up, right? And he shall cast down many 10,000s. So this is symbolizing what? If we were to see the World Economic Forum, that ideology take over the world, what would be the result to the population? And remember, we're just kind of laying this out as a sketch to see if this makes any sense. And then we have to use scriptures and symbols and so forth to tie this all together. what do they want to do? If they're going to cast down many 10,000s, and this word cast down, it's nafal, it means to fall in a great variety of applications. What's that?
Yeah, are you sharing your screen?
Yeah, you see the screen right there in front of you. What
Yeah,
do
but
you
it ain't showing no scriptures or nothing.
what you're seeing is the scriptures. Daniel 11, verse 11 to 13.
But it ain't showing it.
Okay. Can people see the document there?
Yeah,
What's that, Aram?
I'm able to see right now.
Okay.
Yeah, I see it.
Okay. So I'm not sure, William, why you don't see it. Okay. So right, so he shall cast down many 10,000s. Okay, so this word cast down means lots of different things, but it means to fall literally. But it can be used intransitively or causatively. So literally or figuratively. So it can mean be accepted, but cast down, cease, die, divide, fail. So it's got lots of different meanings. Overthrow, overwhelm, perish, rot, slay, smite out. Okay. Would the World Economic Forum want to see the population decreased in this world?
Yes, they do.
Okay. Now, I always say, I'm not a conspiracy theorist. That is, there are conspiracies, but a lot of the stuff that we read on the internet is just misinformation. It's meant to be sensational and to detract us from how they actually want to do things. But there's a little bit of truth in some of these things. It's just, you have to take them all with a grain of salt. Now, so we cast down many 10,000s. Now, here in Hebrew, it just says, and it's kind of, I'm just going to go here to because they say many 10,000s. It's just saying myriads, right? So it doesn't have the word many is an added word. And so we have this word, ribo. Now, in the Hebrew, it says riboot. That's just the plural form, right? It's the feminine plural form. So it just says myriads. He's going to cause to cease myriads. Now, as far as 10,000, so we're just saying myriads. A myriad is, in Hebrew, I'm not sure why they have many 10,000s. I'm trying to figure that out looking at this Hebrew here. So I don't see. I don't see where they get the word 10. Yeah, so the 10 is, they should have, I'm not sure why they put 10,000s in there. That's what they do. Okay. So thousands, really, it's just going to say myriads. So he's going to cast down myriads. Many 10,000s is not really what it says. Okay. But, we can say millions upon millions of people are going to die. Okay. Now, what about his heart shall be lifted up? What does this remind us of? Now, Daniel, so let's just compare some scriptures here. So let's look at this. So his heart was lifted up. Well, in Daniel 5, verse 19 and 20, it says, talking about Nebuchadnezzar, and this is in chapter 5. So this is and go there. Talking about though thou king, the most high God gave Nebuchadnezzar thy father. So this is Daniel speaking to Belshazzar, right? And for the majesty that he gave him, God gave him, all people, nations, language trembled and feared before him, right? But when his heart was lifted up and his mind hardened in pride, he was deposed from his kingly throne. So this idea of the heart being lifted up has to do in pride, right? We also see this same characteristic. He magnifies himself in his heart in Daniel 8:25, speaking of the papacy, right? So this idea of the heart being lifted up, it reminds us of the papacy, of Babylon. So in Daniel 11, verse 12, when we're dealing with this, when he hath taken away the multitude, his heart shall be lifted up, and he shall cast down myriads, but he shall not be strengthened by it. So how would we interpret this historically first, before we even go further? So here's what Uriah Smith says. He says, Ptolemy lacked the prudence to make good use of his victory. Had he followed up with his success, he would probably have become master of the whole kingdom of Antiochus. But after making only a few threats, he made peace that he might be able to give himself up to the uninterrupted and uncontrolled indulgence of his brutish passions. Thus, having conquered his enemies, he was overcome by his vices, and forgetful of the great name which he might have established, he spent his time in feasting and sensuality. His heart was lifted up by his success, but he was far from being strengthened by it, for the inglorious use he made of it caused his own subjects to rebel against him. By the lifting up of his heart was especially made manifest in his transactions with the Jews. Coming to Jerusalem, he offered sacrifices and was desirous of entering into the most holy place of the temple, contrary to the law and the religion of the Jews. But being restrained with great difficulty, he left the place, burning with anger against the whole nation of the Jews, and immediately began against them a relentless persecution. So this is the thing that Jeff had dealt with back when he was looking at this, is this persecution. What was going to happen when Russia would defeat the United States? It was going to persecute all of these Adventists and Christians in Russia, right? That was the idea. In Alexandria, where Jews had resided since the days of Alexander, enjoying the privileges of the most favored citizens, 40,000 according to Eusebius, 60,000 according to Jerome were slain. So that's going to be probably why they put 10,000s there. The rebellion of the Egyptians and the massacre of the Jews certainly were not calculated to strengthen Ptolemy and his kingdom, but were sufficient rather to ruin it almost totally. So I'm suggesting that it's possible we could look at this as some kind of persecution against conservatives, if you want, for lack of a better word. But also we could see this as something to do with population control, that many people are going to be killed. So in the simple way, we would just say this is just put it like that. Any thoughts on this so far? I mean, I could be just totally out to lunch, so. So we're going to put atheistic communism once again. It's not going to be strengthened by this. And that is, it will not weaken the USA at this point, right? So the United States is going to be the leader then in reaction to what occurs. For the King of the North, that is the US, shall return and set forth a multitude greater than the former. So this is going to be start of the Fifth Syrian War. And so how are we going to characterize this? Is this going okay? Or people just not following? I need some kind of feedback.
Well, we have to put ideas out there to be able to consider them, don't we?
Yeah, but any of these ideas make any sense?
Well, we're working through these.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so what would be, well, it's first, what would be the strength of this interpretation? If we're going to put Raphia and Panium as future and give them this more global scope, not two countries fighting against each other, but two ideologies fighting over control of the world. What would be the advantages?
What if these battles are ongoing now?
Well, we definitely can see that they are. I mean, they've been going on for a long time. I mean, if you want to talk about it, we can go back to the French Revolution, right? So these battles have been ongoing. And what we see is a fluctuation back and forth between these ideologies. But now they're going to come to a head in these two battles, right? The Battle of Raphia, the Battle of Panium. On a global scale, and it's going to lead ultimately to apostate Protestantism, the United States, and apostate republicanism, bringing not just to the US, but to the whole world, a Sunday law, right? Bringing about and setting the papacy upon the throne of the earth, that these powers will unite in working together, all thinking that, that this unity will further their ends. Because in some ways, they're not all that different. It's just kind of, who's personally in charge. But they all want to control the world. And so they do it in this way, right? But it's not just these groups agreeing, well, we're going to have a Sunday law. This is actually a battle between these ideologies that results in a Sunday law.
Right.
So the strength of it is just its universal scope. Now, the weakness, what would be the weaknesses of this interpretation? What would we see as a problem? And people watching these videos, comment in the comment section if you're watching on YouTube. So some of the weaknesses that people would put forth, at least what I would think, is they'd say, well, this is a peace and safety message. This is something in the future. We don't really, need to be that concerned. It's going to happen someday. So you're putting the Sunday law off. So that would be what some people might consider a weakness, or that it's not what we really taught. Right? This is about Russia and the US. Russia is still atheistic communism, even though it's neither atheistic nor communist. I mean, from a just an intellectual point of view, so not just somebody looking at what's happening in the world today, would we see that the idea that the World Economic Forum is and its associates are seeking to implement some kind of atheistic communism throughout the world, and that they have been taking steps in that direction for a long time, and that at some point they're going to get the opportunity to attempt communism once again? Or do people think that that's so unlikely to happen, that this is just a pipe dream that these idiots have? They're never going to be able to implement it or convince the governments or the people of the world to go along with it, because there's just too many other interests that are in conflict with this idea.
I would think the latter rather than the former.
So you'd think that so the idea that there's just too many interests.
I would think that there have been too many failures within communism. I mean, we've got people right now that want to see more of a socialistic ideology, something more, and this offends many, but it's something more in line with what Hitler was doing in Germany.
Yeah.
Than to have the type of government that Stalin had at that time within Russia.
Well, so there are people who believe that because of technology, and AI is a part to play in that we would be able to manipulate the population so that it would submit to a control that sort of fits in with their desires, right? So, I mean, we know there's two different visions of this. You know, we have the late great Planet Earth, Aldous Huxley. We have 1984, George Orwell. And, you know, we can see that Aldous Huxley's The Late Great Planet Earth is much more in line with what's actually happening. That people are not so much being forced, but being manipulated, so that they actually want the control. They want to have their games, their pleasure, and if they can have that, then they don't really care whether they have true freedom or not.
Okay, but
yeah.
I don't remember Huxley doing Late Great Planet Earth. I remember that being Hal Lindsey.
Oh yeah, pardon me. I always get that mixed up. Yeah, that's a Brave New World. Pardon me.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks for correcting me. I don't know why I always Brave New World. Yeah. Yeah. Because that's not Lindsay. It's 1970s. Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
I remember reading, Aldous Huxley, but I was never a fan of Hal Lindsey.
Yes, I was never a fan of Hal Lindsey either. I did read his book. But yeah, so the Brave New World, that's the society that we have today, right?
More in line, yeah.
Yeah, it's more in line. 1984, of course, it does happen. Where people can see, some of those things, newspeak and the different things like that. But the reality is that people want to have somebody control their life as long as they can have their pleasure. On some level, they're willing to give up. Well, they're willing to give up freedom for safety. That's for sure. But they're also willing to give up freedom for pleasure.
Okay.
Right? Because they live in a fantasy world anyway. A world of entertainment. Of sports and movies and music. And that's what consumes people. That's what consumes their interest. And they can easily be manipulated not to have children and to see it as a bad thing. And, so you can reduce the population. The idea is not so much, I think, to kill off the population, just to make people not have kids. And, and that's sort of the worry with some of these, vaccines, over the long run, does it have an effect? People would question, does it have an effect on fertility, right? So, and all these different things, chemicals and, radiation. So all these different things around us, are they affecting the fertility of people? Or is it just, crowded, being crowded, types of foods we eat? Maybe these are all affecting our fertility. So definitely people are going to have less children. And, if you're going to have for a while a kind of a top heavy demographic where the older people outnumber the younger people, but eventually, the old people all die off, and then you have, a lot less people. And if you can control that, then the world's just going to continue going on and on forever and ever, right? All we know is that the world, there's these ideologies that exist. And the question is, can they even ever be implemented? Or is there just too many competing interests that would never allow that kind of control of a world government? Or is that something that's inevitable, right? There are people who have different opinions about it. Okay. So, we're starting to look at this. I don't know if this is correct or not, but we want to examine it and see if this fits. So we're going to come back to this tomorrow. So let's close with prayer. Dear Father in heaven, we are grateful for the study today and for the participation. We just ask, Lord, that we can continue to learn and grow, and that we can understand these things. Be with each person, watch over them, and guide and direct us in all we do. We pray and ask in Jesus' name. Amen.